The end of illness. Who would name a book The End of Illness? I'm going to introduce to you now one of my favorite people, and full disclosure, he is my doctor. As you will hear, he was also Steve Jobs' doctor. David has been writing a book called What is Health? One day, the publisher, Simon & Schuster, am I right? Mm-hmm. The CEO calls David and said, David, I got a call from somebody who claims to be Steve Jobs, who's been reading your book while it was being written, and he had some ideas for changes. But if you know Steve, one of the things he was great at is telling you that what you had done was one of the dumbest effing things he'd ever heard of. And so he tells the publisher of Simon & Schuster, What is Health is one of the dumbest effing titles I've ever heard. We ought to name the book The End of Illness. It came out last Tuesday. Let me tell you why I like it. I'm in the business as a venture capitalist of backing disruptive companies. This book I've now read 1.5, almost 2 times. It has disrupted most of the things that I thought I knew about health. David is my doctor. I was diagnosed about 3 years ago with prostate cancer. The only reason I was diagnosed is I had a doctor who every 6 months believed you ought to have a blood test at my age. My PSA was 4. 4 is the high end of normal. I said, well, why do you want me to go get a biopsy? She said, because 6 months ago you were at 3.5. We caught it early. I went to a friend of mine. I said, tell me the #1 oncologist in the world for prostate. I don't care where he is, what. He said, called up David. I think I flew down the next day and saw you. We got to know each other. I want to start off by asking you some questions, and then I'm going to turn it over to David, and I'd like you to be as honest as you can. How many people in this room regularly take vitamins? More than half. How many of you in this room eat your meals approximately at the same time every day? About half. How many of you go to bed at the same time every day, 7 days a week? No hands. How many of you have had a physical in the last 12 months? How many of you have the results in physical in a digital form where you could get to them right now if you needed them? How many of you like to take fresh fruits or vegetables and juice them and drink them? How many of you take a daily aspirin? How many of you take a statin? I told you I can't think of a more important book that I've read. This is my opinion. As I turn this over to David, I want to give you 2 other opinions, and these are quotes from the cover. Dr. Agus has given us a remarkable peek into our health. This book will prevent illness and lengthen people's lives. Written by Lance Armstrong. The second quote that I chose, unorthodox ideas backed by hard science. Michael Dell. David, let's start off. When I came to see you, and you were doing an interview with me, one of the first questions you asked me was, did I take vitamins? And I did not like your answer. Talk about vitamins.
You know, people in this country, in Europe, the United States, they take vitamins to empower them. $25 billion in sales in the United States, $19 billion in sales in Europe with vitamins. If you start to look at the data in the history of mankind, with every study, more than 500 people, there has never been one showing a benefit to any vitamin. And you could start to look at the decrement side. If a man takes vitamin E, which is one pill, which is what's in a multivitamin, his risk of prostate cancer is 18% elevated. The most common non-skin cancer in men, up almost a fifth. Think of what it does to society, just the costs alone. And that was a $250 million study from the United States government to show that. If a woman takes a multivitamin 3 or more times a week, her risk of death is 15% higher. Death is a bad side effect. And you start to look at these ranging from vitamin D. Remember, if a woman takes high-dose vitamin D supplements, her risk of bone fracture is 22% elevated, not decreased. And so you look at the data and you look at our field. Remember, my field also say, have margarine, not butter in the 80s, and we killed a couple of million people by doing that. If you take vitamin D, for example, a high dose, you downregulate the receptor and you screw up the signaling, so that's why you get abnormal bone formation. The science is very clear. In the United States, 91% of people are now called they're vitamin deficient. It doesn't make any sense because hip fracture rates have gone down by half over the last decade. So I'm missing something here. No positive study with heart disease, cancer, or brain ever. All negatives. If a smoker takes vitamin E, beta-carotene, or a multivitamin, the risk of lung cancer death is 25% higher. So again, what am I missing? Why do people take vitamins? Doesn't make a sense to me. And the same is true for juicing, by the way. If you put things into a juice, it's all degraded. It's nothing. Things get oxidized and degraded in hundredths of a millisecond when you put them in a blender. So the key in that regard is real food makes a big difference in what you do.
One of the key parts in your book is you recommended Poland's book on real food. Talk about it.
You know, Michael Pollan wrote an amazing book called In Defense of Food, and it's probably the best book on food. And it just talks about real food. You know, the American diet is very different than the European because we decide we want asparagus today. We go into the supermarket and get asparagus that came in from South America because we want it out of season, and it's been sitting on the shelf for 2 days. It has zero value at all. So you want to say, what came in fresh today? Or get flash frozen, which is so much better than something that's been sitting there for a couple of days.
So when I had my physical, a month ago, I came down and spent a day with you at USC and the full workup. You know, what the bottom line is, people of our age, once we've gotten to this point, we're probably going to die of a heart or stroke, or we're going to die of cancer. I think one of the profound and disappointing parts of your book was in your lifetime, we have not changed the cure rate in cancer. It is the same cure rate that it was when we were all born. Heart, we've probably cut it in half. We can fix heart. We haven't changed cancer. So you wrote a book called The End of Illness. What do we do about cancer? We're all thinking about it somewhere in our background.
You know, 2 to 3 days a week, I look at someone in the face and say, I've got no more drugs to treat you. Unfortunately, you're going to die of a disease, and it kills me. And so one of the things we need to do is to prevent cancer. I know I can't treat it well, and we can go into the reasons why and why things have to change in that regard. But the key is prevention. You start to look at the data, and it's unconscionable to me why we don't prevent more. So, for example, if I put you on a statin, which you can go now in the United States without health insurance to a Walmart and get a 90-day supply for $10. If I put you on a statin, your overall rate of cancer is down by 40%. 40. If I put you on a statin with normal cholesterol, I delay heart attack and stroke by 12 to 13 years. So very powerful in that regard. If I put you on an aspirin a day, a baby aspirin a day, the death rate from cancer is down 18%. Death rate from cancer down 18%. So these are two pills that have a dramatic effect on health. And so, I mean, I want candidates in both Europe and the United States to talk about it. So why should we pay for Medicare in the United States for someone who has a heart attack if they don't take a statin or they don't take aspirin? Why should we pay for their cancer care if they don't take these drugs? We need to bring in culpability and change behavior, or we're not going to get anywhere in healthcare. If healthcare spending in the United States now is 16.5% of gross domestic product, we have to do something different. And the only way is a culture of prevention, which certainly we can do. And then with prevention, you add in early detection, you're going to eliminate a significant, if not most, of the deaths related to cancer.
Staying on statins, when you and I met, you introduced me. Well, full disclosure, my wife is a venture capitalist. She had backed David's company called Navigenics. It's in the same class as 23andMe. How many of you have had a gene scan in one of those companies? My advice is go do it. And here's why. I did his. I also did 23andMe. They both, but his said, the thing I had to worry most about was prostate cancer. That was my #1 risk in life. Unfortunately, I took the test 6 months after I was diagnosed, but it still said that was genetically what I was predisposed to. You get your results back, and it says, are you sure you want to know your results? And you sit there in front of a screen, and then the first disease comes up, Alzheimer's. And if you push return, you're going to get to know, what is it, the APOE4 gene or something like that. I sat there for 5 minutes, I hit return, and it says, you do not have it. I picked up my mobile phone and I called Dr. Agus, and I said, Dr. Agus, if it had said yes, what would you have done?
So, I mean, certainly, obviously, none of us want a predisposition to disease, but realize everything we test for, it's not deterministic. It's not definitely going to happen. Every disease is part environment and part genetics, and you can control the environment. But if you are a high risk for Alzheimer's, which a significant portion of the US population is, about 20%, then you go on statins, you reduce your inflammation, you go on a regular schedule. I can't emphasize that enough. If you have your lunch today at noon and tomorrow at 2 o'clock, for 2 hours your stress hormones go up. And that's a tremendous stressor on the body. If instead you have it the same time every day, there's clear benefits in terms of cognition, exercise performance, physical performance. So I would go on a statin, I'd be on a regular schedule, I'd be lean body mass, and I would work to raise money for a cure, because certainly we all need to be empowered to do that going forward. But I will say something about genetics. You know, genetics is certainly remarkable, and I believe in it. You know, on Nightline, a United States television show last week, I did it with one of their anchors. And their anchor was a 42-year-old guy, healthy as a horse, although I'm not sure what that expression means. And he was skinny and exercised and all of those. And he came down, and we did genetic tests. I mean, he wanted every test done live on the air. And he had a high risk for heart disease. So based on that, I did a heart scan in a 42-year-old, and he had a significant lesion in his LAD, the big artery feeding his heart. And we showed this live on TV, and whether he would have had a heart attack 1, 5, or 10 years, it doesn't matter. He can go on prevention now, and it's not going to bother him. And that's very powerful. But remember, Danny Hillis, one of the great technologists, told me a great analogy. If you're in front of 2 Chinese restaurants, and you look at the ingredient list, they're exactly the same. You then taste the food, they're very different. So DNA is your ingredient list. What your food tastes like, that's the next generation technology. A technology, for example, called proteomics or metabolomics, where we can look at all the proteins in your blood or metabolites, or even the next one is going to be microbiomics. No offense, but you have 10-fold more bacteria in your body than you do cells in the body. Well, these bacteria, they control how you metabolize your food, they control your hormone levels, and they control your risk for many diseases. For the first time ever this year, we can start to quantitate them and look at them. Over the next 5, 7 years, we're going to be able to change them and modulate them based on your risk of disease.
You got to get the book, because I could sit here for an hour and tell you interesting stories that will motivate you to change what you do. And we have less than that, so let me give you a couple of more. Your story about the person from China, the man, who has a rate of prostate cancer that's way lower than the person in the US, and what happens to that Chinese person when he comes here?
It's the wildest thing. If you look at risk for breast cancer in women, prostate cancer in men in China, it's about 1/10 of ours. If they move to the United States after a decade, it starts to approach our risk. And we always said it's the Burger King, it's the McDonald's of what we eat. Turns out it's not the case. It's the bacteria in our GI tract. They start to adopt our bacteria. So in fact, if you look in the United States, for example, breast cancer goes by latitude, because bacteria change by latitude. And again, we're going to be able to modulate them going forward. It's going to be very powerful.
There's 100 things we can talk about. I suspect that the one people ought to pay more attention to is inflammation. Your whole book is laced with all of the bad things and where it comes from.
You know, I mean, and it's a simple thing. Is inflammation, if you look at all the data, is really one of the roots for heart disease, brain disease like Alzheimer's, for cancer. And so if you can block inflammation, statins work predominantly in this case by blocking inflammation. They do lower cholesterol, but their dominant mechanism is to block inflammation. Aspirin blocks inflammation. But if you wear the fancy loafers with just leather soles all day versus wearing a shoe that's got a significant cushion like at Nike or a Reebok or whatever company, think of the difference between a day, a week, a month on those joints. Over time, that adds up. That inflammation builds up and actually increases your risk of disease. So wear good shoes, be on a regular schedule, take the anti-inflammatories like aspirin and statins, makes a big difference. You look at football players in the United States, and one of the shortest life expectancies of any profession, inflammation.
Two more quick ones and we'll quit. I ride my bike a lot.
Yes.
You told me I'd be better off walking.
You know, I'm not sure I said exactly that, but well, I don't want you to fall off your bike and get hurt, part of it. But also, listen to this. 1953 in England, in the journal Lancet, one of the great medical journals, they published looking at 26,000 workers in the British Transit Authority. Well, we can't do these studies looking at broad sections of populations today with consent and privacy, but they could. And what they showed was there were two classes of workers, the drivers that sat 90% of the day, and the ticket takers that walked up and down those double-decker buses. Same weight in both of them, but half the death rate from heart disease and stroke in the ticket takers compared to the bus drivers. So our notion of an hour in the gym doing aerobics and sit at your desk the rest of the day is wrong. You need to move. You need to walk most of the day. So I got one of those accelerometers, and I realized I was sitting talking on the phone all day. And I got one of those telephones that made me look like an air traffic controller, and now I walk around my office, makes a big difference on health.
These people are okay. Nobody sits here 8 hours a day in front of a computer and doesn't get up and walk around, right? You posted your full genetic results in the book.
Yeah.
Why?
You know, it's killing me that we're not learning in our field. It's killing me that we're stagnant. We need to start to make healthcare data available so we can mine it and learn from it. So I posted mine in the book, and it's online. And certainly, we need two things. One is we need data standards, which we don't even have in our field. You call it a broken leg, I call it a fractured leg. Our databases don't talk. So we need to push governments to start to adopt data standards that can allow this explosion of learning from data. And then we all have to be volunteers to cure our disease and help our kids and their kids so they don't get illnesses. And that's by putting our data into a common source so we can start to mine it and we can learn from it and we can get better at what we do. Because we haven't gotten that much better over the last several decades.
Real food regularity. Thank you very much. Yossi, you wanted to make a comment, and I've learned over the last 20 years you're the one person I can't say no to. We were going to do a prostate exam and have you be the demo person, but I'm not going to do that to you today.
Regarding my prostate, I can tell you I got PSA of 2.5. After having it 0.6, I read an article that it's not only the level, but the rate of growth. I asked what to do. I was told to talk to David, and in like 3 months, he got me back to 0.75, and he gave me a certificate of honor for a good performance. Now, I will do something which I'm very bad in doing, and this is doing a sheer, straightforward propaganda. If you are not buying this book, or if or Schoendorf doesn't send it to you as a gift, you are a combination of moron, idiots, and irresponsible people. Because if you read the book, you will learn things that you should do in order to prevent bad things happening to you. I didn't know that sugar is probably the fastest food for cancer. And when the problem that you go into these books only after you have something very bad in your family. I don't want to go into the whole description, but I'm telling you, you better listen for what David Agus has to say. For your own good, for your family good, for your future. Do yourself a favor and listen to this guy. He will tell you not how to cure things, but how to prevent things. And the problem, usually we are trying to close the, how you call it? The door after the horses. Here you have a chance to close the door before the horses. And David, in front of all this audience, it's now like Billy Graham, you know. In front of this audience, I want to thank you for what you have done for me and my family. Thank you very much.